Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Plant Services Compressed Air Podcast Series, sponsored by Kaeser Compressors. Each podcast in this 4-episode series will tackle one of the many facets of compressed air system operation and costing. I'm Tom Welk, the Chief Editor of Plant Services, and today I'm joined by two compressed air experts from Kaeser, Wayne Perry and Matt McCorkle, for a discussion on air as a utility. Wayne is Senior Technical Director at Kaeser Compressors and has more than 40 years of experience in all aspects of the compressed air business. And Matt is Manager of Branch Operations for Kaeser Compressors and has worked as a Certified Energy Manager through the Association of Energy Engineers. Welcome, guys. Thanks for being back for this one.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom.
Well, and especially for this topic, too, air as a utility, I appreciate you being on the podcast because I've noticed that Kaeser and other compressed air companies have developed some new options for plant customers to operate their compressed air systems. Wayne, maybe I can start with you for the first question. What are some of the alternative models that you see are gaining traction in the market?
Well, Tom, when I started in this business, the only way to operate a compressor was give somebody a purchase order, buy the compressor, and then you're on your own. Today, a lot of things have changed. I'd like to start by talking about just the enhanced service programs. Normally you could get a service contract with a service provider, and that would just cover the regular maintenance on it. If anything broke out of the ordinary, that was on you. So you still had some uncertainty as to what your costs for maintenance were going to be. But now a lot of providers have got enhanced service programs that not only do the regular normal maintenance, but will take care of anything that breaks, any failures that you have on components in the system. And you have a set fee every month, so you know what your maintenance costs are going to be. Still your equipment, but at least that part of the equation is now kind of evened out so that you know exactly what you're going to be spending. Most of these kinds of contracts require an extended period, 3 to 5 years. It's on a contract for 3 to 5 years. The other thing that's happened in the market is you can contract a compressor for, a 1-year term. And that includes all of the maintenance. Your service provider will bring out a compressor, put the compressor in, and the service provider handles all of the maintenance and service for a monthly fee. And that monthly fee can be a fixed fee or can be based on the amount of air you use, and that's really based off the number of hours that the machine runs. And then the third thing that's out in the marketplace and has been here for some time and is not pushed by a lot of people, but a lot of people actually like it, and that's using air as a utility, where the service provider, like Kaeser, we call our Sigma Air Utility, owns the equipment, operates the equipment. The end user doesn't pay for any of the equipment, has really no upfront costs. They don't get charged during the installation or anything. They don't get charged until they flip the switch and start using the air. And then they get charged by the cubic foot of air that they use. Generally in those systems, there's backup for everything. So customers really just buying air like it would buy water or gas or electricity.
I think one of the things we're seeing in terms of these alternative models, Tom, that Wayne has talked about is, as systems become more complex, customers are realizing maybe it's not advantageous for me to operate and own this. And so I think that's one of the things that's driving these alternative models is, yes, they can do some of the basics and the fundamentals, but when you get stretched and staff is thin or expertise is thin and you have increasing complexity to reach the efficiencies and the performance that plants demand these days, it can make sense to have somebody else take care of that work.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, there's an ongoing challenge to hire experienced technicians on the maintenance and reliability side. It can be even more expensive to hire a compressed air technician. So, man, as long as you're talking about this, could you focus a little bit on Kaeser's Sigma Air Utility? How is that offering implemented, and what are some of the practical considerations that customers should think through?
So our Sigma Air Utility program is our basically the full featured offering where customers do not own any equipment, don't contract for any service. It's all inclusive, and they just as Wayne was saying, they just pay for the cubic feet they use on a monthly basis, just like other utilities. And the process to get it started is very similar to a capital purchase, at least in the beginning, in the sense of you want to assess the needs. How much air does a plant need? What are their minimum, maximums, averages, and what's the air quality that's needed? So typically we'll conduct a study just like we would in a normal situation. And then we design a system. We design redundancy into the system. And then frequently what happens in these cases as well is we'll design an enclosure for the system so it doesn't take up plant space, because one of the benefits of outsourcing is truly fully outsourcing the compressed air system. So it's not taking up any plant space, and it's outside your facility, still on obviously the property of a plant, but not taking up critical production space. And so once we have that design, and then we can present a contract that say, okay, this is what the rate would be on a monthly basis to put this in place. And once this is started up, that would be what you would pay for air. You'd no longer have to maintain equipment or own equipment. It would completely be outsourced, and you would just have a monthly bill as you would other utilities. Yeah, the practical considerations I think most plants should think about are, do you want to devote manpower to maintaining and operating your compressed air stations? Would you dramatically benefit from not having the space taken up with your compressed air plants? And these are some of the things that we find that plants find a lot of value in, and think that this is a better solution than owning.
To add something to what Matt said, when he said, we go in and evaluate the system, we do a complete study on how much air is being used, where it's being used, how it's moved around. And in most of our air utilities, we go in and correct problems with piping being undersized, headers in the wrong place, that sort of thing, and that's rolled into the price of the air utility. So customer may have had tremendous pressure drop getting from one side of the plant to the other, and we'll fix that as part of the air utility. We want to be sure that we supply the air at the right pressure, the right flow, and the right air quality. And to do that, we've got to fix all of these generic problems that we find in the plant when we do the survey. It's not just we just plop some machines on the ground and say, here you go. We want to make sure the whole system works the way it's supposed to work.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned cost as part of that answer, Wayne, because I wanted to check with you on that. You mentioned a couple of different models at the start of the podcast of what is out there for customers. How do specifically air as a utility type models compare financially to the common method of buying equipment and doing maintenance in-house, or even paying suppliers for maintenance and repair services?
Well, a lot of that depends on the company's financial needs. We've been doing this on some greenfield operations, and the main thing that the user looked at is, do I want to spend $1 million or several $100,000 on compressors, or do I want to buy some production equipment that's actually going to make me money? And a lot of times they decide they'd rather spend the capital that they have available on production equipment, and then just pay a monthly fee for using the air. So that's one of the issues that comes up financially. The other thing is, as you pointed out, Tom, I want to have, am I going to be having to hire people to maintain the compressed air equipment, or do I want them to maintain the production equipment? And we've had customers who've had these air utilities and renewed them because they now have their maintenance and engineering people working on the equipment that makes them money and not trying to maintain a utility. They don't generate their own power or pump their own natural gas and have to maintain all of that equipment. They don't really, with an air utility, they don't have to do that with the air either. We've even had some customers who had an air utility for 10 years and decided they wanted to run their own equipment, bought the equipment from us, kept it on site, ran it for a couple of years, and then called us back and said, come give us a quote on another air utility. We don't know how to maintain this equipment like you guys do. They, said, we're having downtime, and when you guys were running it, we never had downtime. It used to be that you could keep all of this stuff, air as a utility, off the books. They've made some changes in the last few years in the accounting rules, so you basically still have to treat it differently from if you were just renting equipment or paying a utility bill. But you don't have that cash outlay up front. Now, if you've got a compressed air system that's 5 years old and all the compressors are still on the books and they're all running relatively well, air as a utility normally won't make sense to you. But if you've got compressors that are 10 plus years old, or you're doing a greenfield, we can make a real financial case where, now you're going to have a good compressed air system, and you don't have to have capital available. You don't have to put this in your capital budget to buy all of this equipment and maintain it. The other plus side from a financial point of view is that in most manufacturing plants, those people, as Matt has said, don't really know how to maintain their equipment, and they wind up with fluctuating pressure, low flows, low pressure, bad air quality. We had one of our air utility customers tell us, we had sold this on, we're going to save you money. Because when we do our study, we can tell you how much money you're spending to power your compressed air system. And then we can tell you how much money you'll spend to power our air utility. And we sold this particular customer because it was going to save him a whole lot of money on power. And he had an old system. After it had been in there for about a year, he came to us and said, we now have steady pressure, good flow, good air quality, and it's made such a difference in our productivity. That made us way more money than the money we saved on power. So you've got to look at all of these things to figure out how it's going to make sense in your particular situation.
Financially, I think a lot of times what folks don't consider with compressed air stations, if you just look at the cost of the compressor, and maybe you even include the direct costs of energy and having maintenance done, you might say, oh, that's not all that much money, but there's so many hidden costs that aren't taken into account, and related to downtime or your maintenance staff or upgrades and engineering and controls needed to operate the system correctly. And customers that really benefit from Sigma Air Utility, they tend to be the ones who've experienced those costs, and so they want to offload them, or they're, as Wayne said, they're starting out new. And in those cases, they can realize, oh, I don't have to hire that staff or plan for those expenses, and I have the assurance of no downtime. And those are significant costs, and that every customer incurs or has to deal with if they're operating and owning their own compressed air station.
Matt and Wayne, let's dive into some of the specifics about air as a utility. And Matt, I'll start with you and follow up on your comment about getting the system started up and running, those considerations. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going to want to know, between the client and the provider, who is responsible for paying for what part of the system when you start air as a utility?
Well, the part that Kaeser always pays for, that the provider pays for, is the equipment and the service and the operation of that unit. We monitor the units. We're responsible for all maintenance and repair costs, and we're certainly responsible for supplying the equipment, and in many cases, the enclosure that the equipment is operating within. And the part that is sometimes negotiable or varies by site is the site work. In some cases, we may pick up a little bit of site work, and sometimes the customer pays for the site work needed. Generally, we try to make that a minimum in terms of where we put the equipment, and then bringing in the electrical and bringing in the piping, because that's more infrastructure. So in many cases, customers pay for that because that would stay on site permanently with that facility. But in other cases, sometimes we'll roll it into the contract. Those are some of the negotiable parts. And we certainly arrange for the placing of the equipment, the rigging of the equipment. Now, when it comes to the operation of the equipment and maybe the cooling water, if there's a cooling water needed, or the actual electricity to operate the compressed air station, the customer is responsible for those fees. It's against their electricity bill. And generally speaking, there are guarantees and in the contract or limitations in terms of that rolls into the overall performance of the compressed air station. So they know that there's not an incentive on our part, on the supplier's part, to increase energy costs at all.
No, and to Matt's topics that he talked about there, we can't guarantee what the customer is going to be spending on power, because we can't control the cost per kilowatt hour of the power. We can tell the customer, here's how many kilowatts you're going to use, or kilowatt hours, to make this much air. And in some contracts, we've put that in there as part of the contract. And as to what Matt said about who pays for what as far as the infrastructure goes, is exactly right. We can roll all of that into the cost of the contract if the customer doesn't want to spend any money. But that increases his monthly cost for the air utility. We've got customers who actually want to pay for all the piping, pay for all the power being brought in, and keep the monthly cost as low as possible.
Okay, well, Matt, let me ask you one more question about performance benefits. We've touched on that a little bit during today's podcast, on how these kind of services can really help the plant teams focus away from the utility equipment and more on the production equipment. Can you talk a little bit about some of the performance benefits that you've seen some plants achieve with air as utility?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the most significant one is related to reliability. These systems are designed to run and have redundancy built in. So no matter what the environmental conditions are, or what happens with the usage in the plant, that they are supplied with a stable air pressure at the quality that they need. And when plants realize that can be assured 100% of the time, it's just incredible what the savings that they can benefit from. So that, I would say, is definitely number one. The number one performance benefits that plants achieve with these Sigma Air utilities. And it's not to say there aren't cases where we've had downtime, because we certainly have, but it's always been due to some extremely extraordinary events, generally weather related. And when you look at the 15 plus years that we've been doing Sigma Air utilities, you can count on one hand the times some of these oddities have occurred and we've had downtime, because we're the system design experts. We understand these customer applications, and we understand how to deliver the air at the right quality and control the compressors to deliver stable power. So the key thing, I think, and the biggest performance benefit is definitely the reliability. Now, certainly, Kaeser's huge on energy efficiency, getting more air for less energy, and everything that we provide. Our Sigma Air Manager, our SAM product, is industry leading in terms of the control algorithms that it uses. So we are able to squeeze the most air for power out of these systems, and customers certainly see that benefit too, particularly when it's a case, one of the cases Wayne mentioned that's very common with Sigma Air utilities, where you have aging equipment and it's a significant capital investment due to maybe how it was installed and just how old it is in terms of trying to get new equipment in there and operational. A lot of times those are energy hogs, and with older controls, older technologies, and when they come in with new technologies, modern equipment, modern controls, savings can be dramatic. We've seen just hundreds of thousands of dollars in energy savings with Sigma Air utility solutions. And again, there's no capital outlay to see those benefits. The other performance benefit is, I think, as we've all learned with kind of some of this COVID and supply chain challenges that we face, production isn't always steady. You make projections, you plan, but economic challenges happen, world events happen, and you have to be able to upsize and downsize. And Sigma Air Utility, we have that flexibility to say, okay, let's add to this contract. Okay, let's modify this contract. And those are all possible, which I think it's much more easily done in these scenarios than it is if you have hardened assets that you own and need to use whether you need them or not. So those are really the three key benefits that I've seen from many plants: reliability, optimizing energy that was previously aging equipment, and then flexibility.
Well, Wayne, we come to the close of the podcast, so let me aim the final question at you. What did I miss when we talked getting these questions ready? Are there any other benefits or considerations to areas of utility that we haven't covered yet that we really should mention before we close out?
Well, one of the things that people don't even think about, I was with one customer, we were sitting down going over what it really costs them to maintain their compressed air system. And part of that was their purchasing department. Every time they cut a purchase order, it costs money. Every time they receive parts or pieces, goes into their warehouse, all of that handling costs them money. And we went over and looked at how much they spent every year just in handling purchase orders and receiving equipment, parts and pieces to fix the compressors that they had. And it was a huge amount that normally doesn't get looked at when they're trying to figure out, okay, how much does our compressed air system cost us? Usually what they do when they do that is they just look at, okay, how much did we spend on parts and oil and things like that? And, how much did we spend on power? And they think that's it. And it's not that at all. When you've got an air utility, basically the user doesn't touch that equipment. They don't touch the parts. They don't touch any of that. That's all Kaeser's responsibility. So you've got that to consider. You don't need to train your personnel on how to operate compressors. And I will tell you, 98%, 99% of the plants that I've been in 40 years, they don't have people on their staff that understand compressed air systems, how to generate the air, how to get the air from one spot to another spot, how to make sure it's treated right, how to maintain it properly. And when you get an air utility, you've got a service provider there who does understand that. And that's their business to understand that. And it makes a big difference on how reliable the system is. As Matt says, we always include redundant equipment so that if there's a failure of a compressor or a dryer, it automatically switches over and the customer never sees it. We've had customers who told us that they couldn't believe how reliable our systems were, that we never had a failure on it. And we're just kind of shaking our head and saying, oh, yeah, we have. You just didn't know it because your supply didn't change. We made sure that you had the supply that you needed, that you were contracted for. The other thing is, I talked about how expensive it is to purchase and handle that, but you've got customers out there who stock parts and consumables, and that's an expense that they don't think about. You don't have administration issues with how are we going to get our people out, when are we going to schedule people to do this particular service or that particular service. It's like switching on a light. You open a valve and you've got air and you don't need to worry about it. But the biggest benefit that I've seen in the 15 or so years that we've been doing it is people just have that peace of mind that they've got a constant air supply and they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to maintain it. They don't have to do anything except use the air.
There's enough trouble on the production side. Why would people needlessly need to worry about the utility side, right?
That's right. There is one thing. When we're talking about air utility, we're talking about several hundred horsepower. The first question you asked me was other options. People who have a small shop or something but don't want to spend the capital, there are other options for them, as we discussed in the very first question. So don't think that this is just about big, huge systems.
Well, thank you both for being here, and thanks to Kaeser Compressors for sponsoring this series. There are already 2 episodes in the series that have been recorded. One of them is on alternative design strategies for compressed air systems, and the other is on compressed air system data monitoring. So thanks once again to Matt and to Wayne for being here today. Thanks to our sponsor, Kaeser Compressors, and thank you for listening.